Now, we have talked about approaches, the soft approach to Islam, the debate approach, the contextual approach, or the go get 'em and zap 'em approach. Okay, so I wanted to give you something that's absolutely fresh about the go get 'em, zap 'em, condemn 'em to hell approach this morning, because I just got it a few minutes ago. I think I mentioned to you last Friday, so a week ago tomorrow, in Charlotte they had a protest at the mosque. And I didn't have the details, but now I have the details of that protest. It did not come out in the paper. It was not on TV in local news, which I'm very glad about. I think they made a decision not to give this group any high-profile coverage, and that's great, even though police were there, and it was a pretty big thing. So what happened was Operation Rescue, do you know, anti-abortion, go and protest in front of abortion clinics. You all know about probably Operation Rescue. It's had quite a big ministry. A lot of evangelicals have been part of that protest, so peaceful protest, right? And so a lot of people don't like it because they show the unborn fetuses and the pictures of sonogram stuff. But anyway, that group seemingly has become Operation Save America. Is that correct, Julie? Operation Save America, I think is the name. So, but it seems to be the same group, and they're incorporating Islam now in their Saving America. So these people are going to save America from Islam, from abortion, and from homosexuality. So they hit Charlotte. They've been there for a couple of weeks, this group. I think each state has chapters. And so this is North Carolina chapter. And so they hit Charlotte, and they did anti-abortion at some clinic or other. But then on last Friday, they went to they say the biggest mosque. It's either the biggest or next to biggest mosque. I've been to 4 mosques in Charlotte. I have not been to this one. But I know the location. Julie's actually been there. She went to a Muslim women's meeting there. So they came back and they put their view of what happened on the internet, on their website. So Operation Save America then would be the way to find it and to get all the detail. I need my...
you can't do it.
I can't do it here, okay. So I just want to show you a little...
If you do it there, you might be able to. You have to do it there.
I have to come here?
Well, try it, see if it'll work right there.
No, that's okay. I'll let you do it. I'm just going to read a bit, and part of it I'll read quickly because there's quite a lot there, and you all can look at it and see the pictures and stuff. Okay, so here's Operation Save America up on the left. We came to slay your false god, the slaying of Allah. Arising early in the morning, the saints, evangelical Christian saints of Operation Save America, knew an intense day awaited them. We were scheduled to minister at 4 different gates, plus attend our nighttime rally. The heat was brutal. It was about 100 degrees on Friday. As we went forth, clothed in the armor of God. The first 2 gates were 2 of the 3 death camps that operate in Charlotte, with the blessing of the state and the silent consent of the majority of the church. The 3rd gate is the one that this report will concentrate on. Went with some women. We went to the largest mosque, okay? Keep going up, Julie. All right, so we showed up just before their prayer time and set up our sound system, okay? Signs and tracts. The message we came to deliver was simple. Abortion is murder, homosexuality is sin, and Islam's a lie. First 2 statements probably didn't bother them very much, but I can assure you the last one did. Immediately 2 Muslim men came over to where so-and-so was standing in the gate, typical fashion. They wanted to dialogue with us. Philip said, Philip told them in no uncertain terms, we're not here to dialogue, we're here to slay your false god, Allah, and preach to you the gospel of Jesus Christ and all his love. No, that wasn't in there. And declare him to you. It was evident they were not used to, USED, to Christians being this bold in their presence. They are used to the seeker-friendly friendship, evangelism that treasures their dialogue. Of course, they salivate, that's a beautiful word, and play naive Christians like a violin. Just get this statement. Naive Christians like a violin as they consider us weak, effeminate, and easily deceived by their cunning and deadly agenda. Situation escalated considerably as Brother Antia, OSA's resident expert on Islam, never heard of him, took the microphone and expose the fallacies, heresies, and their oppressive totalitarian agenda. And he preached this. Muhammad was a liar, he's a false prophet, he's bound by lust, had over 20 wives. Never heard that. It's the first time I ever heard he had 20 wives. I've always heard max 12. One being 9 years old, of course, was Aisha, that's true. When he, at 54, that's true, had sex with her, and I wasn't there when it happened, so I'm not sure he had sex with her at 9. He was a deviant and a pedophile. He was a thief and a murderer. He abused women. To this day, Muslim imams claim that they respect women, stating that they allowed their men to have 4 wives. How convenient for Muslim men. Muhammad violated every one of God's holy commands, made a religion out of it. Since then, Muslims have practiced adultery and polygamy under the cover of their perverted religion. Mohammedan Muslims are the ultimate misogynist, women haters. Their religion exists only for men to satisfy their lust and their desire to dominate women, who Muhammad claimed were naturally stupid, like domesticated animals, and whose testimony in the Sharia court is only worth half a Muslim male. Muhammad taught Muslims other brilliant truths, such as Satan urinates in the ears of those who fall asleep during prayer. That's true. That's in Bukhari hadith. So, okay. Yes, Muhammad taught such ignorant foppery. I've never heard that word. I guess it's a good word. He also allows Muslim husbands beat their wives, just not too severely, because as mentioned, all women are stupid. Islam pioneered, this is all his preaching going on in front of the mosque, in front of Muslims. They came out and surrounded him. Islam pioneered the slave trade. And they were the ones who enslaved the Africans long before the white man ever appeared on African soil. The white man, and goes on like that. In supreme irony, it is American blacks seeking racial identity that are coming under submission, the very meaning of Islam. Go ahead on up a bit here. Another picture with a policeman. We had 2 of our men that went inside the mosque as men of God preached outside. They see, everything is Christian, right? That's the sad part of this. They said that they were turning on each other inside the mosque, the Muslims. One group wanted to come out, defend Allah, fight us, while the moderate ones called for reason. Eventually, the more devoted ones came out and shouted their infamous Allahu Akbar. And for those who aren't familiar with this term, typically the Islamist terrorists scream this phrase right before they blow up themselves and innocent bystanders. So evidently they expected that, and that would make them good martyrs. Okay, at this point I took the microphone, told them plainly, you're chanting empty words to a non-existent God. If you want to be heard from the true and living God, you must pray to the Father in Jesus' name. Out of all the places that we went to in Charlotte, OSA garnered more support from surrounding neighbors and stuff. So, there it is. How's that for methodology in Muslim evangelism? It's really sad, you know. That's my city. Those Muslims are people that I want to reach for Christ and want to show love and all the rest of it. So, I just so that's fresh off their website this morning, and then they also have their tract that they gave out. So it's a similar type thing. So they give out thousands of tracts, they said. Basically the same type of stuff. So, okay, we can go and we can pick out points. Okay, the Quran specifically says, if your wife does not submit to you and after a time trying to reconcile, then you can beat her. And the word in Arabic is actually to beat her. So that's in the Quran, not just the hadith. So it has a high authority. So that's terrible. There is no doubt that he married Aisha at 6 years old, took her to live with him at 9, which everyone could say is possible. She had her period, and therefore at 9 years old wasn't all that unusual in the culture of the day to take. And to us that seems brutal, but it was not all that unusual in the context of the day. So he did that. Testimony of a woman is half, that's true. And the reason they give is that it is a man's responsibility to look after the woman, the wife, and therefore his testimony is more valuable in a court of law, and he has to take financial responsibility for her, whatever. I mean, it doesn't excite me either, but that is in the Quran as well. So they have holes. Now, all I can say is just turn over to D-Dot, and you can find holes in the Old Testament that you never thought about taking the rebellious son to the gate and killing him if he, you know, rebellious son. Okay, my son's rebellious, so take him to the gate. The elders kill him. Homosexual, kill him. Adulterer, kill him. There's a brutality in the Old Testament. Take the infants and smash them against the rocks. Babylonians. So, I mean, they can pull that out and put it in a track and say, this is the God of Judaism and Christianity. This is why we couldn't even countenance such stuff or whatever. So we're all capable of doing that, right? Hinduism, Buddhism, Shintoism, Confucianism. We can, atheism, you know, we can all just spend our life attacking each other and going for the deficiencies or inadequacies or places that people can't defend very well. So we could do that. But that's not our calling. It's not our calling. And to be propagators of love and embracing. So, okay. That's kind of where I am. Any other comments on a more forthright? I mean, you can be forthright. Jay Smith is forthright, okay, in London at Hyde Park, and he's up there preaching away, and he will mention some things about Islam also, but he won't go like this. He won't go like this. And so all I can say is that that's not me. Comments? You okay? Eat too much last night? Okay. We talked about selection of target group. Muslim dietary practices are adopted. This was very difficult for us and when we first went to that village and had no food choices. Okay, so we had fish and fish and fish, or eggs and eggs. And one day, I think we counted up, I don't know, 15 or 20 eggs Julie served me when we first got to that village in various guises, from omelet to whatever. And so they were duck eggs. We couldn't get hen eggs because they go bad real quick in the heat. So we had to eat duck eggs, and they're strong taste, and they're not nice. At least I don't think they're nice. So anyway, I lost 20 pounds first month, and Julie was seeing me disappear in front of her eyes. And she decided that she ought to look around for some alternative food ideas. And so we got into some really good Bangladesh cooking thing. Julie picked it up very quickly and found out you didn't have to make it so hot that you didn't want to eat it. And so then she became a gourmet cook of Bangladeshi food. She's even been known to teach Bangladeshi women how to cook their own food, and came up with a cookbook. It was very interesting. You know, all the men were feeling their wives were inadequate cooks, the missionary men, and wondering if there was help out there. So Julie asked for recipes from women who are missionary women out there who have different ideas using local food. And so she put this in a cookbook and put some gardening hints and a little bit of linguistic stuff. And anyway, and done some illustrations and all of this, and then made it a book. And ABWE, Association of Baptist World Evangelism, published it. And then it appeared in all the hotels and the bookstores in Dhaka and circulated among the missionaries. And again, missionaries would say to Julie, "You saved our marriage." That cookbook gave us a way to stay in the country and a way to still appreciate my wife. And so it was very valuable. Also, it was interesting that, like our friend Dr. Ali and his family, just to think that we appreciated their culture. I mean, it had Bangladesh food, it had foreign food, and it had the language and stuff. And it didn't have any gospel witness. It was just a survival book, I guess, how to survive in Bangladesh. And but the Muslims, Dr. Ali would show that book to all his friends, saying, look how they appreciate our culture, our food, our life. So just a little thing like that, just to build bridges, and I think that was helpful. So today, Indian food is my favorite. Sorry for the Middle East here, but that was really good last night. But Indian food really is special to us because, admittedly, we spent our life eating it. Even after we left Bangladesh, we're still into it. Okay, just how they now, just a word on this appreciation bit. We have had missionaries, to me, make a serious mistake by when they invite their Muslim friends over. They would serve the right food and stuff, but it would be such simple food. And Muslims, generally speaking, will equate how you respect them and honor them by the type of food you feed them. Now that isn't picked up well in American culture. And so some of these missionaries just fed them very simple food, and I'm sure they were offended. They'd never say it. But so when we had Muslims to our house, again and again in Bangladesh setting, Julie would always come out, especially with the Ali family, which was a very upper class family, to put out the best food possible. So be sensitive to that. Read out cultural norms. It may be different in various countries. Okay, time is regarded as event-oriented. I think we've talked a bit about that. Provision for washing before prayer was a difficult one. Okay, so we're getting the first believers, we're getting inquirers, and we're getting Muslims coming to that little discipleship center. Now, it's always been, and will forever be, very important for a Muslim to wash his feet and his hands, go through the ablutions, right? Now, with this mixed community, one of the problems our team faced is, what do we do about putting out water, expecting them to wash before they go in the discipleship center, not putting out water so they'll know that they're free from the law and that it's grace and they don't need to go through all those ablutions to pray to God and to learn about God and to come into God's house, in a sense, the discipleship center. Then beyond that, what do we do as missionaries? Do we ourselves go through those ablutions before we go in, or not do that? So if this was you and you had to make a decision along those lines, and maybe some of you have made decisions if you have a situation like that I'm describing, what's to be done? What are kind of the issues, and what do you think is appropriate? We just felt that we could not request, not make available the water, because this is what they've always done. I mean, this is so much ingrained. These guys, 40, 50 years old, and they would never go before Allah in a mosque setting without having clean feet, hands, and face. So what we found was that by putting this big pot of water out there, that for starters, the people just coming as inquirers or new believers, they used it. And pretty soon after we continued processes of discipling and always pressing, it's not a legalism. I mean, this was so important that we try to get away from you do this, this, and this in order to please God to get to heaven. So with that emphasis inside in the teaching, the optionality of that, and the missionaries also being optional, we found that pretty quickly it kind of dropped off. Now, if they came in from the village, which they often did, they'd use that pot to clean their feet, which is appropriate, maybe throw some water around, but they wouldn't do it in the ablution way, the prescribed way. So for our use, this worked fine. This worked fine. But some people say, well, that is so Islamic, and it's theological, and it's ritual, and it's what they do. So therefore, you shouldn't do it. And I can understand the point. It's just that in the reality on the ground, we found this work. Any comments on that? Shoes are removed in worship. I've never been in a mosque where the worshipers had shoes on. Never. And of course, they get shook up when they go into a church and everybody's wearing shoes and all the distinctives of being in a church that they don't understand. So we just follow that. I mean, that's a very simple thing to do. Worshippers sit on the floor, and now the sitting style. So now here we have the women issue, right? Well, in the beginning of all this, it was men to men, right? So we go out to these reading centers, and there are no women out on the streets, hardly at all in the village settings where we were. There was all men. So therefore, it was only an issue of men coming in to talk to us. I can't even think of a time a woman came in to talk to us. So that was fine. But then our whole goal was to get families and to win women to Christ. So as soon as we began to get the men to believe, then we said, now you have a responsibility. Go to your wives and teach them about the Lord and get them converted, hopefully. And then we'll go from there as to how this whole thing of worship and coming together or not together, all of this was difficult. This was not, it is not easy today. To us, when we see one of these MBB wives come to Christ, it's just a very exciting thing. Often the men think, oh, my wife is so stupid. She's often illiterate. He can be literate, she'll be illiterate. She's so stupid. She'd never understand these profound truths and all this stuff. And in Bangladesh, out in the villages, it can be pretty brutal. The men can really slap the women around. I mean, if Islam allows it in the Quran, and the woman is being difficult, why not slap her around, get her in shape? And so it goes on. I've heard some pretty tough stories. And that has led to what in Bangladesh today, even as I talk? It has led to Muslim women committing suicide. And they drink acid, or they burn themselves. This is also common. Or they jump from a high building. They have various ways of making their statement and ending their life. And then many times the issue is that they don't die, and so they're crippled, and then they're thrown out, of course. And then what do they do? So the whole thing is really tough. Now, I'm not saying we're talking about hundreds of thousands every year, but I'm saying it comes in the paper every day. I'm saying there's enough women that just find life so oppressive that they look for the way out in that way. So, as we're now trying to say to the man, you have now entered into a new relationship with your wife. This is what the Bible, we spend a lot of time on that. This is what the Bible teaches about a husband-wife relationship. Remember one guy, I mean, been told the story by one of our people, I wasn't there. He said he was a new convert, and so he was coming into the group, and one day he was quite excited. He said, you know, I'm really getting the teaching about this husband and wife thing, and I'm really doing great. And so the missionary said, well, what do you mean by doing great? He said, well, I used to beat her 5 times a week. She'd do something wrong, or the curry didn't have enough spice in it, or the salt wasn't in the rice, so I would just beat her and slap her around. And he said, but now that I'm a Christian, I only do that 2 times a week. I don't do it 5 times a week anymore. So this is progressive sanctification, right? I mean, it's a culture. It's a culture. I mean, Dr. Ali told me this. I mean, he's in on everything. He was my informant par excellence. He told me all kinds of stuff about Islam I could never, ever have understood without him. So he said that in the village, if the girl, the daughter, is disobedient to the father, he will say to her, if you don't do this, I will have sex with you, and then use a vulgarity for the word sex as a punishment. I mean, that blows our mind, right? But this type of thing at its crudest level, believe me, in rural settings, in many Muslim rural settings, life is crude, right down at the crude level. It's just survival. You saw this in Afghanistan. What did that do to you? Just looking at that village. Just thinking of those people with no money, no food, no work. Just think how they live day after day after day. So what happens out of that? Frustration. What happens with stress and frustration when it reaches an intolerable level? It comes out and explodes in various ways. So I'm not making an excuse for it. I'm not. But all I'm saying is if we have wife beating in America, where you pick up 911, you see these pictures of battered women, movie stars, all the rest of this, and you read in the paper the statistics of battered women who actually go the 911 route, and it blows my mind in a more freed up environment where women have an access to 911, police protection, sheltered homes. I mean, we have a relative just sent us an email a couple of weeks ago, and she's a Christian, husband's not a Christian, and she left, I think it was either in the middle of the night or the next morning, and went to a shelter for battered women. This is Julie's, I don't know, something cousin. So here's a woman who, she's Christian, good Christian, okay, good Christian. but she couldn't take it anymore, and we don't know the full nature of the abuse. All we know is she went to a shelter for battered women with older kids, and so this is America. Now, why are we so condemnatory of Muslim settings in which they don't even begin to have the facilities we have to stop, and the societal protest that we have against it? Simpson's wife, you know, Nicole, appears and after she's killed and brutally killed, and then her face all swollen up, and OJ had beat her, and you know, Americans aghast at this. Well, you know, here this is America, and then other illustrations, so many. So I'm not making a case at all for this, that Muslims have some rationale for doing it. It's horrible. But now what in that context of upbringing then, and we're trying to work it out so that women are respected, women are loved. All right, now, if we then begin to get the women, the wives, or the children or whatever, and begin to get them either as converts or inquirers, serious inquirers, and we are starting to get this house worship setting going, then how do women integrate into that? Well, it's a man's world. And so basically, the men lead the meeting and the Bible study and everything. And what we have found works a bit is that women are on the periphery, maybe on the veranda of a small house, a bamboo type house with tin roof, and they're outside with the windows open. They're listening. And that's one format that we know has worked somewhat. So again, thinking many, and we talk, MI&I, when we talk about these worshiping groups, you know, they're not big churches at all. So somehow we've got to, within the cultural milieu, we've got to get the women. All right, now you say, okay, so here's where single women can come in to go out to the inquiring women, the wives of the MBBs, and the answer is yes and no. If they are allowed to and feel comfortable with, and the receptor group feels okay about it, can go out and do exactly what I said, that's good. That's good. And should be followed. Then what about the wives of the missionaries? Well, what we have found is the wives of the missionaries usually are so busy with their kids, with hospitality, just everyday life, which is at a very cumbersome level. It takes so much time to just cook meals and oversee if you've got a house helper, which can be a blessing and also not a blessing. And so all of these things you're trying to put together, and then how much time, how much energy is left over to go out to the village and reach these women? I tell you, not much. That has not been a successful model in Bangladesh, small towns where our missionaries have been in the past, just because of those problems. So we have leaned heavily on the men, and we are very grateful for the women who've come to Christ, and for Habil's wife, who's such a beautiful person. And she then, Habil's wife, the evangelist I was telling you about, she then is a very competent teacher, okay? So now she's teaching the women. So once you can get some of these women coming to the Lord, and they can have some freed up time and go in with the other women, this is the best way to go, by far. Everything is trying to get going. It's always when you're at ground zero with nothing that it really blows you away. And I'm the first to say that, you know, that is the difficult thing. And that's when often we look to paid evangelists, okay, paid workers, because we need something to get our thing going. So we'll talk about that when we get to the finances. So anything you want to, we've kind of taken off on this about women. So any contributions that you have or interaction? Definitely a man's world. And thankfully, like mentioning Iraq, this is changing in the cities. Again, internet, TV, cable, whatever. So we are seeing a paradigm shift in women in Islam, and some have been so bold as to write books and articles and internet sites saying, rise up, women of Islam. And so what did the women do in Saudi? You know, how many was it? About 12 women. This was a couple years ago. They all went out, got behind the car wheel, and they drove around in procession. I think it was in Riyadh. And everybody went berserk. And these were well-educated, probably Western-educated women who had husbands high up in various positions, and they dared to bring disrepute on the government, on the husband, on the family, on the people, on the king, and on. But the whole thing was, take them out and kill them. But there's a problem because they're such high-level women with the family connections. So they couldn't just take them out and kill them. They couldn't throw them in prison, actually. But they came out with very strong edicts. It was a huge thing in Saudi that, of course, that women don't drive. Muslim women don't drive. And for them to dare to do that was horrific. A great violation of Allah and Muhammad. It happens more with men, all right? So they will come and say that their brother's going to kill them, father's issued a fatwa against them or whatever. They're running for their life, or maybe they've been beaten and they have to have shelter. And on the men's side, we try to respond to something but it's no easy thing. In Pakistan, there's a halfway house. So if that incident happened with a man, they would be sent to the halfway house who would give them shelter for some period of time. But immediately you do that, you have a dependent, you have an extracted person, and it's not only not going to go anywhere, it's just bad scene all around. Are you going to spend your life doing that, extracting people? So the first step would be sheltering someone who says he has been beaten for the cause of Christ, which may be true or may not be true. Maybe it's just a loser in the family and people didn't like. I don't know. How to get to real truth in all of these instances that may happen. So I would say that we have, over the years, the missionary community have tried to make accommodation for the man in that situation who would come through one form or another. Now the women almost never come. I have no experience of a woman coming as a battered woman because of her faith, being battered by her husband and wanting shelter. Because it would, culturally, to go to a foreigner and display that, it's quite unlikely the woman would even come to Christ if her husband hadn't come to Christ. In most rural Muslim settings, I'd say it would be unlikely. If they did, they'd be extremely careful how they talked about it to their husbands. Now, these are macro statements. Everything has exceptions, right? So I'd say overall, the chance of that happening is less just because of the way the culture works. If she would walk away, that's everything that's been everything to her. She more likely would commit suicide. We know of a case in Indonesia, we heard of a case in Indonesia where a woman like this came to Christ and she was in suffering persecution and she was hearing about heaven and how wonderful it would be when we die to go to be with the Lord, and then she committed suicide. She felt that in the Christian setting it would be better to be with the Lord in heaven than to go through all this hassle on earth. So that's a tough one too, right? Big time tough. Leanne, did you have something? Okay, anybody have something to add to this about women, persecution, any experiences? Amy, have you got anything on Afghanistan with women? So all I can say to this is we don't give up on this. We keep pounding the Muslim men who are believers now that this has got to change. This is strictly against Allah, against God, against Scripture. And slowly, it begins to get into their hearts and their behavioral change. So that's that, all right? Bibles are placed on folding stands. Often we have found that the people who come in from outside for short-termers and they're evangelistically zealous, and we've heard of a situation where one of these Americans comes out and he has the New Testament and he's telling us the Word of God and this is what it says, and then he puts it in his back pocket back here. That's where he puts his New Testament. Well, I'll let you think about that. But they respect. So at our reading center, we wrap the Greek New Testament, the Hebrew Old Testament in cloth, white cloth, and we put it on a high shelf. And it was very important to us to show respect. So Operation Mobilization then was a part of SIM, is today, from the early 70s right up till now, Operation Mobilization is part of SIM for visa cover, for working together. It's been a great relationship. So Operation Mobilization would get young guys, Bangladeshi guys, to go out and sell literature, and that's how they would live. If they didn't sell books, they didn't eat. It was very simple. And they go out on rickshaws and bicycles and boats up the rivers, and hundreds of thousands of pieces of literature went out over the years through OM. Now, it's a dusty country when it's not raining, and so they would just kind of put their literature in the back of a van, and off they would go, and kind of crumpled pages and dust all over. And then they go out and say, the Word of God, you need to take a look at this, the Word of God, and it was not presented in a nice fashion. So somewhere along the way, the penny dropped, and they're not giving a profile of the Word of God in an appropriate manner. So then they use plastic, and from that point on, they always put the tracts and the Gospels or the New Testament in plastic, and sold it as a little packet thing. So it was very good, very appropriate. So just a thing like this, I was on a launch going down the river overnight in Bangladesh, and so everybody tries to get every little bit of space you can, and it was on the upper cabin and just some wooden slats to sleep on, so I got enough to lay out on, and the Bangladeshi Muslim was over here, and I was here, and so we kind of spread out, and suddenly he sits up and he starts screaming at me, and very, very angry at me. And I'm thinking, well, now what's all this about? You don't want a Muslim angry at you when you're on a launch going down a river, right? You may not make it to destination. So I said, well, what's wrong, And so he said, didn't you see? I said, see what? He said, well, there's the Quran, and you have your feet pointed toward and almost touching, and maybe did touch, I've forgotten, the Quran. The feet touch the Quran? How can you do such a terrible thing? I said, okay, I'm sorry. So then I switched around. I had my head toward the Quran, not my feet. So, little things like this that don't seem meaningful to us, but so they go in a church and they see Bibles on the floor. If they visit a church, a Muslim, they'll see a Bible on the floor. And if there's just regular seating, things like this. So to be careful, and again, I emphasize why I don't take a Muslim to church because of all these different issues, right? Okay. Prayer now. This one we're going to spend some time with, and we have a nice slot of time, I think, before. I'll tell you now about Dr. Ali. When we went to this town, Kushtia, never had a convert in the history of the world, we get there, and Julie and I are there first, this town of 40,000, and the other two British couples, and Habel and his wife, are going to come later. So Julie and I are there alone. We go and rent this little 3-room place, very hot, no running water, erratic electricity, so that's home. And so now, what are we going to do? I'm the guy who's written the book, New Paths in Muslim Evangelism. I have my doctorate at Fuller. I'm supposed to be the guy that knows something, and I'm the leader of the team, and other places are starting to see Muslims come to Christ. This is 1980. So I had said, I don't want to be field leader. We just want to go to a place that nothing's ever happened, get a team, try to make it happen. It was a very intimidating experience, to tell you the truth. I was middle-aged, about 45, and so now if I can't make this happen, and the others are making it happen, and I'm the architect, one of the architects, this all looks kind of bad for ego. So I was well aware of those facts, being a rather ego-slanted person. And so we get there, and so what happens, but these kids come, high school, college kids come. Oh, do you have National Geographic or Time magazine, or can you get me a visa to America? Can you arrange an American wife? And all this stuff that goes on, as you're all aware of. And so I said, no. So I'm not very happy. I'm not a happy camper. And we don't have fellowship with the other team members coming to come up with kind of our strategy of the book rooms. We haven't started those reading centers. So the guy comes in, he says, would you like to meet Dr. Ali? I say, who's Dr. Ali? He said, well, he's the only PhD in town. He's a professor, He teaches at the local government college. He's head of the English department. Would you like to go over and meet him? So I'm thinking, anything's better than you guys, so let's give it a try. So we went over to the college, and in comes this effervescent, outgoing, just tremendous guy, my age, into the room. And in the Bengali way of, not all Bengalis are this way, but a lot of them are very sanguine and outgoing. And so we talked for a bit, and I said, we're, you know, part anthropologist, part missionary. I didn't hide that I was a Bible teacher. So he said, well, come to our house. I said, well, that's great. So the next day we went to his house for tea, and it was a much nicer house than we lived in, and had property with a pond and fish in the pond and all this stuff. So we went in and we met him and his wife, who was a professor at the girls' college. So a very intelligent, upper class professor group. And then the 3 kids, and then some servants were there, 2 or 3 servants, and then some others were around. So they were just so nice. And the daughter, Lulu, was just effervescent like her dad. She was just carbon of her dad. She was then in about first year college or something. So then we just sit and we talk real nice, we have a great time. Then the call to prayer goes. You can't be anywhere in Bangladesh not hear the call to prayer. So this nearest mosque was their mosque. His dad, Dr. Ali's dad, had built the mosque. So a call to prayer goes at sunset. So they all, with one accord, stand up. Everybody that's there. His old mom and dad were still alive then, and they were in the room. Everybody stands up. And they said, oh, please excuse us. You know, we're drinking tea and eating sweets. And they all march out. And they say, we'll be right back, but it's prayer time. Okay, so they'll be back in 10 minutes. So out they go. We're sitting there and looking around this big living room, a lot of books, calendars, pictures. And while they're out praying to what I consider is a false conception of God. And this is crazy. They're praying. We're talking about calendars. So I'm thinking, let's see if we can do something about this next time Ali comes to visit us, if we can get him to come. So he come back, had a nice time. We said, now come and visit us. So a couple days later, they came to our house. So call to prayer goes at sunset as we're eating, drinking tea. And he immediately, doesn't matter that he's in my house. This prayer thing is not just for his house. This is a lifestyle. Dr. Ali, I don't know if he has ever missed a time of prayer 5 times a day in his life. So anyway, he stands up. He's very flustered. He gets flustered at times. He can't get all the words to go along with his brain patterns. I'm an absent-minded professor at times. And he says, oh, well, can we go somewhere and pray? Him and his wife, and 1 or 2 others. I said, yeah, that's fine. I said, I'll pray with you, and the women will go with Julie in the bedroom. And, you know, that takes them all back, because they have never prayed with a Christian or with a foreigner. And what does all this mean? So, but they're on our turf. So they said, okay. So off Julie and the ladies went, and Kareem, or his real name is Anwar Kareem. It's always referred to him as Dr. Ali in the books to protect him. So we went into the office, and I had mats spread out. Julie had mats spread out. And he faced toward Mecca. I faced toward Jerusalem. We were looking the same direction. And so then he has his prayer hat on. I put a prayer hat on, and then he starts going through the whole thing of the rakas, and I just sit and hold my hands up and pray. Okay, so he finishes his raka and ends up like I am, squatted kneeling with my hands up. So I did not go his prayer form. So then there's extemporaneous prayer time. A lot of people don't know that, but at the end of the prayers, that's when they pray for family and they pray for the prophet, of course, too. And I never understood that very well. I asked Muslims why they pray for peace of the prophet Muhammad, and they never come up with a good answer. Anyway, so we're there, and then he prays in Bengali out loud, and then I prayed in Bengali out loud, and then we stood up and embraced each other, Muslim way, right, left, right, like we'll do tomorrow. And this was a shocking experience for Dr. Ali, but not in a bad sense, in a different sense, right? I mean, he had already said that he fell in love with me. Now, you got to understand, this Bengali language, holding hands. He's the one I held hands with for 8 hours on the bus. And saying that I love you and all this stuff, you know, it's very flowery. Hello to our Arab. And then we finished off the thing and began a relationship. He then saw me as something beside a businessman or an anthropologist or something. He saw me as a man seeking God. That was what happened at that moment, okay? So therein began this fantastic relationship from 1980 to 2010. So it's a 30-year relationship. And I'd get on the back of his old motorcycle and off we go to the villages, off we go to the Sufi meetings, off we go to the mosque. And he just, I mean, he was, I would say, the most respected layperson outside of clergy, most respected layperson, and as a real practicing Muslim in that whole district of a couple million people. Just a tremendous respect. People would get off their bicycle when they saw him coming and just go down like this and give him the salam. And here I am, a white guy, and people coming to understand I'm a missionary, right? And here I am holding on to the back of him. And so he begins to pick up the feedback. What are you doing with a missionary from America, really? And so I said to him one day, I said, look, I don't want to embarrass you. And I don't want our friendship to be something that's difficult. You know what we're doing. You know we're out in the villages and we're sharing our religious faith with Muslims out there. You know that. And if that all connects so as to give you a problem, I'll back off. He said, absolutely not. He said, I don't care what they say. Well, no, he's so esteemed, he could throw that off pretty easily, so he did. And I remember one day he said, well, let's go down and see the superintendent of police. He knew all the governor, the mayor, superintendent of police. They're all his friends. He'd go to their parties. He would throw parties. They'd come to his house. This intimate relationship with everybody. I mean, it's just mind-boggling in that district of 1.5 million people, say. So I said, superintendent of police? I stay away from those guys. I don't have anything to do with those guys. Those are guys that can get you kicked out. I mean, just say the word and I'm out of there. So here he is telling me, let's go visit the superintendent of police. So I said, okay, let's go see what happens. I'm always for new experiences. So we go, and here's this big parade ground and all the police, I mean, for the whole district. This is the center. We go up to the superintendent of police office. And it's this big, this room. And there's a big man himself, about middle age, and he just welcomes Dr. Ali as a great friend, and he's very friendly to me. And so we talk for a while, and then he says, the superintendent of police, right before we were to leave, he said, would you like to come and give a word to all the chief of police next week? He said, we're going to have a meeting, and all the village and town police chiefs are coming together in the auditorium, and you and Dr. Ali come along and you can speak. Ooh, this is getting deep. So I didn't know anything to say but yes. And as we're walking out, I looked at Dr. Ali and said, what in the world have you got me into? Why'd you do this? And this was his answer. He said, if we neutralize the superintendent of police towards you and he becomes your cover, you'll never have a problem here. Wow, it's a Muslim talking, right? So, okay, so the next week came and I'm on the platform with Dr. Ali, superintendent of police, and here's all these, probably 100 Bangladeshi chiefs of police. They're all thieves, they're all take bribes, they're all bad people, but anyway, they're there. So I give my little talk about let's be upright examples. I spoke in Bengali, they'd never heard a foreigner speaking Bengali back in those days, way back then. Now it's a little more common, but not then. So I spoke and told them to not take bribes and to, and they were all going like this. And, So now, they were taking pictures, okay? Somebody was taking pictures. And those pictures of me with the superintendent of police went out to those police tanas, out to those village and towns, that I then was covered by the superintendent of police. And we never had a really overwhelmingly serious problem from that day till this day in that district where, say, 600 Muslims have come to Christ. And, I just praise God that this was a linkage. Now, I'm not always saying this is a good idea, because other places I stay away from these guys. And, but in this instance, let's just say that Dr. Ali, the man of peace, right? This is what Frontiers likes to talk about, that we find a man of peace that can be a friend, be a covering, be an instructor. I sat at his feet as he taught me Islam. I didn't know anything about folk Islam. Now I've written a book about folk Islam, but I say in the book, he's the guy that led me into the whole thing. Women in Islam. We didn't understand women dynamics, and Julie and I put out Lifting the Veil as a result. A lot, not only of the research, but of the things that his wife and mother, I mean, we had access completely to their home. You know, other people stay in the living room. We went to the bedroom. We shared meals. We'd go to their house, the most fantastic meals. They'd come to our house. He would invite us to the governor's house banquet, and we would go there. And so in a small way, it was like what we had in Dhaka with the president, smaller. But for there, it was big, okay, even though it's small. And so there began a journey of friendship that I will never forget. I'm just so grateful. This daughter, Lulu, went on to take bachelor's, master's, civil servant exam. She is now, along with her husband, they're both deputy secretaries. So if you think of Secretary of Defense in America, they would have a deputy secretary of defense. That's the level they are. They're at the top level of government. So the other day, phone rings, and she says, Lulu says, "Hello, Uncle. I'm sitting in our apartment in Rome," and I knew, we had known, we'd talked before, that she was the economic, liaison person for the Bangladesh government for Italy. And while she's there, somehow, Food Agriculture Organization, FAO, is that it? They had picked her up, and that, you know, they're always looking for really sharp women. And so she ends up on the executive of the UN FAO, and she says, "Uncle, I've got a BMW, and I've got a driver, and you've got to come here, and the driver will take you all over Italy, and my husband is here, and he'll take you all over." And then we talked to her and the husband and the son. So before this was recent, before this they came to Charlotte. Incidentally, she's a Harvard graduate. She got a Ford scholarship thing, Ford Foundation scholarship, got a fully paid trip to Harvard with a master's in public administration. I mean, she's brilliant. And so anyway, but she goes to Harvard and goes to UN from time to time on government business. So this time we said, "Come down and see us in Charlotte." So she, her husband, son. And we just had the most wonderful time. You know, we hear all this bad stuff about Islam and what Islam produces, and here are these beautiful people. I mean, we just enjoyed them as much as any visitors we've ever had. The husband is just a beautiful person. And the son, the 12-year-old son, you know, I put my arm around him one day. We're walking around, seeing around Charlotte and stuff, and I put my arm, he's so nice and obedient and gracious, and I put my arm around him. He takes my arm down. I said, "Okay, if you don't want my arm around you, sorry." I didn't say that, but I'm thinking that. Then he takes my hand. So let's be appropriate here. So then we walk everywhere holding hands together. So, you know, just the beauty of that friendship. There are the difficult side of that. His wife died recently without knowing the Lord. In fact, here is the enigma of enigmas. We have given everything to them spiritually, cognitively, in love. We have just covered the ground, right? He calls me his best friend ever. And he hasn't come to Christ. There's no indication that he'll come to Christ. And I mentioned earlier, it'd have to take a dream or something really big time to get him into the kingdom. But all those 600 out there have had 1/100th of the amount of exposure to Christianity in all the areas I just mentioned, as Dr. Ali has. None of that family's come to Christ. And the old father died. The old mother is just barely alive. And Dr. Ali has got health problems, and he's a depressed person because his wife died. And so in all of that wonderful, wonderful relationship, you cry out to the Lord. I pray for him all the time. He's on the prayer rota. And we email back and forth. And just really praying that God would do something in his heart. But if anybody, there's no Muslim that would even begin to touch the influence that Dr. Ali's had in my life. So I mention him in my books that you all will be reading. And just to give a little personal testimony about the privilege, I consider it a high privilege to be able to have met him and seen the best of Islam, okay? This guy is gracious, humble, concerned for others, compassionate, everything that you would want an evangelical Christian to be in character and integrity. He went right up to be the principal of that government college. He's written 7 or 8 books, and on his accomplishments go, but he's a Muslim. And I still long for him to see his need, because he doesn't see a real need in the sense of religion. I mean, we would be out in remote areas and he would stop a car, stop the motorcycle. It's prayer time 5 times, and absolutely without fail. And this guy would, I've seen him out in a field, a little bit of Sufi influence. I've seen him raise his hand during a storm, and the mango trees are blowing back and forth, and he'd just raise Allahu Akbar. So it's not something to kill somebody. It's something to praise God. God is great. So, mysteries, enigmas, and we press on. And take what comes down the pike and do the best we can with it, right? And on that high level, we shall break for chapel, because the people will be coming in. Okay? Take a break afterwards.